In the year 74 AD, a Roman merchant stood before Emperor Vespasian and handed over his entire fortune. In exchange, he received something that, ounce for ounce, was worth more than gold. It wasn't a jewel. It wasn't a relic. It was a plant. Just a handful of seeds from a plant so valuable that the Roman Empire could not control its own appetite for it, and so rare that within a single century, it would vanish from the earth forever. This is the story of Silphium, the most valuable plant in human history. A miracle cure, a culinary obsession, and the world's first effective contraceptive. It was depicted on ancient coins. It was worth its weight in silver. And despite being so treasured that entire economies were built around it, we drove it to extinction nearly 2,000 years ago. But here's what nobody talks about: we may have just found it again, and the location where it might still grow will shock you. Welcome to Story Vault Nation. Today we're uncovering the mystery of the plant that ancient Rome loved to death. Chapter 1, The Discovery That Changed Everything. Our story begins around 630 BC on the coast of North Africa, in a region the Greeks called Cyrenaica, modern-day Libya. Greek settlers from the island of Thera had just founded the city of Cyrene after a 7-year drought forced them from their homeland. They arrived in a land unlike anything they had ever seen. The soil was rich, the climate was mild, and along the coastal hillsides grew a plant that would change the course of ancient history. The locals called it Silphium. The Romans would later call it Silphium. And from the moment the Greeks set eyes on it, they knew they had stumbled onto something extraordinary. This plant had thick roots that looked almost like ginger. It grew tall stalks with broad leaves, and at its center was a cluster of small yellow flowers arranged in a distinctive umbrella shape. But it was the sap, a sticky, aromatic resin that oozed from cuts in the stem and root, that was the real treasure. The Greeks discovered that this sap could do things no other plant could do. It could cure coughs. It could soothe fevers. It could season food like nothing else. And it had one property that, in the ancient world, was nothing short of miraculous. But here's where it gets strange. Silphium would only grow in one place on Earth, a narrow strip of coastal land about 125 miles long and 30 miles wide in Cyrenaica. Attempts to cultivate it elsewhere, in Greece, in Syria, in the gardens of the wealthiest Romans, all failed. The plant simply refused to grow anywhere else. It was as if nature had placed it there deliberately, guarding it jealously, making it priceless by design. And that exclusivity would become both its blessing and its doom. Chapter 2, Worth Its Weight in Silver. By the 5th century BC, Silphium had become the economic engine of Cyrene. The city's coins bore the image of the plant, sometimes the full stalk, sometimes the heart-shaped seed pod, sometimes a woman touching the plant with reverence. Those coins would spread across the Mediterranean, becoming so iconic that archaeologists still use them today to trace ancient trade routes. The numbers are staggering. Julius Caesar, upon taking control of Rome's treasury in 49 BC, reportedly stored over 1,500 pounds of silphium in the state vaults, alongside the gold and silver reserves. When Roman writers tallied state assets, silphium was listed as currency, not food. Pliny the Elder wrote that the finest grade of silphium sap would sell for the equivalent of an entire month's wage for a skilled worker, for a quantity no larger than a modern sugar cube. The demand came from everywhere. Chefs in Rome used silphium as the ultimate seasoning, a flavor described as a cross between garlic, leek, and something utterly unique. The famous Roman cookbook of Apicius lists silphium as an ingredient in over 100 recipes. It was the truffle, the saffron, the caviar of the ancient world all rolled into one. Doctors prescribed it for everything: warts, snakebites, digestive problems, respiratory infections. The physician Dioscorides wrote an entire chapter on Silphium's medical applications, calling it a universal remedy. Soldiers carried it into battle. Sailors stocked it on long voyages. But there was one use that, more than any other, drove the insatiable demand to a fever pitch. Chapter 3, The Ancient Birth Control. Here is where the story takes a turn that has historians still arguing today. Silphium was, by all surviving accounts, the most effective form of birth control in the ancient world. Roman physicians wrote detailed instructions. The sap of the plant, when consumed as a small dose mixed with water or wine, would reliably prevent pregnancy. The heart-shaped seed pods, and yes, that shape may be why we use the heart symbol today, were crushed into a fine powder and taken orally, producing the same effect. For a civilization that had no other reliable contraception, Silphium was a medical miracle. It allowed women unprecedented control over reproduction. It shaped family planning in ways that ripple through demographics to this day. The plant became so closely associated with female sexuality that it appeared on coins next to the goddess Aphrodite. It was mentioned in love poetry. It was whispered about in Roman bathhouses. And as word spread, the demand became absolutely insatiable. Every wealthy Roman household wanted a supply. Every merchant wanted to corner the market. Every physician wanted to prescribe it. But there was a problem, a fatal flaw that nobody recognized in time. Unlike wheat, unlike olives, unlike grapes, Silphium could not be farmed. Every single dose consumed came from a wild plant, dug up from the Libyan hillsides. And the landowners in Cyrenaica, seeing money growing out of the ground, set about harvesting it faster than it could possibly regenerate. Chapter 4, The Harvest That Killed It. The people of Cyrene tried to manage the resource. They imposed harvest limits. They set aside protected areas. They tried, desperately, to domesticate the plant in controlled gardens. But the economics were overwhelming. A single mature Silphium plant was worth a small fortune. A landowner who left plants in the ground was leaving money on the table. Worse, the intensive grazing that accompanied Roman expansion pushed livestock into Silphium's territory. Sheep and goats devoured the young shoots before they could reach maturity. The nomadic tribes who had traditionally harvested Silphium sustainably found themselves pushed out by Roman agricultural operations. Within a few decades, the once abundant hillsides began to thin. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder documented the crisis in real time. He wrote that in his lifetime, around 50 AD, a single stalk of Silphium was found in Cyrenaica. Just one. It was cut, carefully preserved, and sent to Emperor Nero as a gift. Let that sink in. A generation earlier, entire ships carried this plant across the Mediterranean. By Pliny's time, finding a single stalk was a national event. By 100 AD, Silphium was gone. Completely extinct. The plant that had built an entire city's economy, that had filled Caesar's treasury, that had given women in the ancient world their first reliable birth control, vanished. And for nearly 2,000 years, that was the end of the story.